I died on a mountaintop. I should have realized this sooner. In the rainy season, the clouds would swoop in and drench the land. But I never got wet, though no roof covered my head. On sunny days, I'd sit, abandoned, in the ruins of a once great hotel and watch the red orb set over the civilization below. I was like a god, perched on Mount Olympus, observing everything. The first thing I heard after the world collapsed was the moans. Then, silence. People stopped talking to each other and started talking to God. I heard their prayers to voodoo gods I did not recognize. I should have realized then that I was no longer of this world, but I was too busy listening. I felt the pulse of their grief and heard their stories dance by, but I could only grasp snippets, an occasional phrase here or there. Language wasn't the problem, not anymore. Maybe it's because their stories were never mine to hear. In the days after the earthquake, the prayers started to mingle with the sounds of digging. The survivors dug and dug and dug, occasionally finding a trapped soul before death could claim it. But they were too late for me. Gradually, as the months passed, the sounds changed. The city filled with the coo of doves and the beeping of cement trucks. The music filled the sky, and the stars shined more brightly with each drumbeat. Even here, in the richest part of town, recovery was slow. Much of the rubble from the hotel was carted away, but a collapsed foundation remained. Newly minted construction workers would half-heartedly add pieces of wire or pour cement, but it was a lost cause. It would have been better to let the dead sleep, to abandon what was in favor of what could be. I shouldn't have been here on a mountaintop oasis as the world below me fell apart, a world that I loved but did not understand. One that my heart wanted so badly to fix, although deep down I knew it was not my battle. Maybe I'd made a mistake by coming, but at least I'd never have to wonder what my life would have been like if only I had been braver. My parents came. I wish they hadn't, for I could bring them no closure. There was no body, no bones, just a giant hole in the earth. I watched them as they searched. I saw the regret that weighed them down with a force stronger than gravity. I finally realized when I saw my mother cry, when I called out to her but she could not hear me, when I hugged my father and all I felt was air. That moment was scarier than the earth shaking, for I realized that I was no longer just a foreigner in a strange land. I was a ghost caught in between. I didn't know how to leave this world and cross into the next, so I prayed to Jesus and Mary and every voodoo god I could remember. God did not answer. Not me, not the Haitians. But we continued to pray. Each day, as the sun crossed over the mountains and set into the sea, I asked for help. Weeks passed, then months, then years. Finally, the workers stopped collecting the rubble and gave up trying to mend what was beyond repair. They picked a new spot to build on a different part of the slope. It was the sensible thing to do. But what would become of me, of this place where so many died? The longer I worried, the more restless my legs grew. Some believe there are sorcerers in this land who can control the dead and turn them into zombies. They think that when someone dies, their soul will temporarily stay behind. If their family fails to perform the proper ritual in time, then the soul will be trapped on earth forever. And then a sorcerer can capture the lost soul and put it in a jar, as children sometimes do with frogs. I had no idea if this was true. All I knew was that I had never received the ritual, and I felt uneasy on top of that mountain. So I began to walk. I waded through the hotel ruins, past a crater that looked like a gaping open wound. Flowers bloomed all around me, hibiscus and rhododendrons and tropical species I didn't know. I had intended to stop at the old gate, but my legs had something else in mind. I found myself walking past the vacant guard booth. I continued down the mountain, past a few miraculously intact houses until I reached the bottom. I walked and walked, past the stray dogs and the rivers of trash and the collapsed buildings, past the vendors selling bagged water by the side of the road and the colorful tap-tap buses overflowing with passengers. Past the woman carrying charcoal and sugar cane on their heads. Past the United Nations trucks filled with unwanted soldiers and the stray chickens chasing after them and the boys begging for food. Past the dust and the stones and the crumbled orphanage, until I found him. He was in the middle of a camp. While his mother and sister slept inside their tent, Jude was outside under the night sky. On the ground was a large hunk of concrete, which may have once belonged to a house, maybe even his. In his hand was a paintbrush. He worked swiftly, furiously, as if his life depended on it. I loved seeing how much he could do with so little. In his hands, a shingle became a village, a blank wall, a river, scrap metal, a tree. He would paint and cut and weld and meld until trash was transformed. I used to watch his hands so black they were almost blue as they performed something akin to magic. The concrete beneath his paintbrush was covered with stars, a background that looked like it had been created a few days prior. He was adding something in the foreground. I watched as he painted 2 blue eyes and curly brown hair. Then he added my smile, wide and full of life. I reached for his shoulder, but all I grasped was air. He stopped painting, though. He put down his brush and stared up at the stars. Long before the earth shook, Haitians would say, "This country is finished." But that's not what Jude thought. He showed me that there was still light in this land, despite everything. "Thank you," I said, though he did not hear me. I looked around me at the land of survivors, at least for now. But everything. "I'm sorry," I said. Then my legs carried me away from him and toward the sea. When I reached the ocean, I boarded a boat. As it pulled out of the harbor, I looked back at the island. From the water, I could understand why Haitians say there are mountains beyond mountains. For the mountains never end there, nor does the sorrow. Time passed, and I found myself at my parents' front steps, thousands of miles away from the Hotel Montana. I didn't know if my family could help me cross over, but I knew I'd be safe there, in a place where problems were small and easily fixable. A Band-Aid for a scraped knee, a hot bath after a long day, a hug for a weary heart. I sat on my front porch and listened to the ocean. The waves sounded the same as they did from my mountaintop, except here the air was colder, cleaner, calmer. Here I could watch my sister grow, smell my mother's cooking, hear my father's prayers. Here I could rest in peace.